Prologue, New Purgatory. There's this rumor that's become prevalent about our team. It's said that 6 of us took out an entire platoon alone with stolen military hardware and the aid of the strongest military attack this side of the remainder of New Purgatory. They say we managed to ambush the team and leave our mark by piling up the bodies, spray painting over a wall with our team's name, and using explosives to rile the local populace and leave a bloody mess down an alleyway. What a load of shit. John Morrison and his propaganda machine are trying to lump me and my team in with the rest of the gangs he's cleaned out in the past 10 years. The problem is that he's winning. Every day we're seeing more soldiers coming in the different sections, the places where the poor live. My friends and I are nothing but street kids, but we're bound by our shared hatred of the man who would lead this city. We're tired of watching our friends and family being stolen away and forced to fight in his military or labor at his camps. We're tired of watching each other die every time we want to fight back, and we're tired of being blamed for every one of this city's problems. The man at the top wants a new scapegoat, a new group to blame for the newest uprisings and the murders of his soldiers in the streets. All we've wanted is to survive, but now we have a new purpose, a new reason to exist beyond finding a fucking drain pipe to drink from and a rat for a meal. We're going to kill his soldiers every time they come looking for us. We're going to send a message to the man at the top that we are not to be fucked with, and when our time comes, we will show him that not one of us will go out without taking more of them with us. John Morrison wants a message, a scapegoat. Then I'll give him the one he wanted. Tonight is the night we go on the offensive. Tonight is the night we start retaking our city one dead Marine at a time. Tonight, a revolution is born. October 25th, 2036. Alex's Journal. It seems like every month a new gang pops up to try and make a name for themselves. It grows old, my son, but I have a solution in place. I've reached out beyond our borders to a new mercenary army, General Autonale. He commands 50 platoons of various soldiers from out the wastelands of the Midwest all the way to New Purgatory, fighting every kind of evil son of a bitch along the way. He is the perfect solution to the gang problem plaguing my city. John Morrison stood behind his desk and looked upon the vast megaplex that was once New York City. The rebuilt skyscrapers in his district nearly touched the sun. The ground that thousands of people once walked, however, was cluttered with trash and poverty. You could just let my squad go in and clear those assholes out. They're no different than the Denims, the Veil Snakes, or the Crush. One-time bandits to be dispatched by a strong display of force, the young man said. Morrison turned to face the eager gentleman that was his son, James. He was young and brash at only 19, and as much as John had wanted a peaceful life for his son, James inevitably picked hatred and war over the silver spoon life. He knew there was a sense of pride in that his son was willing to earn his birthright rather than have it handed to him, but it had done nothing to change his child's haughty attitude. John's blue eyes looked his son up and down. James wore his black and gray camouflage military outfit, an obsidian black M.M. beret. He was not afraid to lock eyes with his father, and John knew his son was too brave to back down. "You are right, son, and that quick display of force could bring them down. But that is why I'm bringing the general in. The occasional border skirmish and scorched earth on the lower people's settlements is not working. We need to make them understand fear, to understand that I will not put up with this rebellious nature," John replied, raising his voice. "Yes, sir," the younger man surrendered. James understood his father's wisdom, even if it felt like a slight at him and his team. "I will not allow my city to be plagued by these fools any longer. This band on the outskirts will be a message for the rest of New Purgatory," the elder Morrison said as he turned back around to face his home. John smiled at his reflection on the mirror and touched the glass. "But I don't see any harm in starting early," he continued, tilting his head back slightly. "Go and clear Section 4 in East Harlem, and then do an initial roundup with the APCs. Slaughter and burn any resistance. I want the stench of death to linger for the rest of that section, as a reminder of what is to come to those who disobey my rule." James let a rare smile come across his face. "Yes, father," he spoke. As his son marched out of the room, John Morrison grinned and watched the sun slowly set behind the horizon. He had shaped and defined New Purgatory. It was a place that had been home to millions of people before his rise, but that was to its detriment. No more would the people he protected walk the streets filled with garbage and human waste. No more would he have to endure the weak and the helpless begging for the change out of his pocket. John Morrison was slowly correcting the old world's mistakes one day at a time. With his son at his side and with the general on his way, his power would only grow. No street urchins would change that. "How long until he sends a squad after us?" a woman asked as she lay back on a mattress, arms behind her head. "I don't know, Layla. We've been hitting a lot of his soldiers lately. The peace can't last forever. When he does come after us, though, we're going to remind him that he doesn't own this part of the city," a man hunched over a chair replied as he cleaned his rifle. "But Alex," Layla started, looking up at the man she loved. "Let's leave the consequences for later," he replied, setting the gun down on the ground and looking back at her. "What if there's no later, Alex?" she replied, eyes locked with his. "That's what we're fighting for, Layla, to make sure there is," Alex said. He took his hand and brought it behind her head. "I love you." "I love you too," she replied, sharing a quick kiss with him. "He'll try to launch a counterattack, though. Maybe try to wipe some refugees out to get us," she continued, tossing herself back down on the mattress. "Yeah, and we'll have to fight back when he does. Protect the refugees and kill more of his men. Make him angry," Alex replied and shook his head. He knew she just couldn't let it go. A taller man walked into the room of the slum. He was in a black duster coat, old torn jeans, and had an old leather holster at his side where a pistol rested. "And angry people make mistakes," the new man said. "Evening, Eli. How are you feeling?" Alex asked, standing up and looking towards his friend. "No worse than usual. Tyler and Van are at it again. Something about the explosives we used in the alley," Eli replied. "And Remy?" Layla asked. "Nursing her knee. That piece of shrapnel really dug into her last night," Eli said and ran a hand through his black hair, feeling and revealing a few scars as he yawned. Layla stood up and patted Alex on the head. "Well, I'm going to check on her, see if I can help. I'll be back in a few." "Are you both okay?" Elias commented, grabbing a seat on the mattress. "Yeah, I think so. Reservations about provoking Morrison. I'd be lying if I didn't feel the same way," Alex replied, sitting back down in his chair. "How are you holding up?" Elias shrugged. "You know me, Alex. This is what we need to do if we ever want things to change. It's just coming in at a higher cost than I thought." "At least you're keeping things in perspective. I mean, now that we're wanted men," Alex sighed. "That's the only way to live," Eli replied. "Maury's going to come down hard on us, you know. Layla's worried. He's either coming for us or more innocent people," Alex explained. "I get the feeling that he'll send his hit squads after us. 6 of us against a squad of 20 men, and if the rumor about Section S4 is true," Elias trailed. "S4?" Alex asked. "Morrison made it a migration zone for people coming from outside of the city, or for people who are looking to get out of their own situation. Soldiers are headed there today to supply aid. I'm betting it's a trap to lure us out," Eli replied. "This is what we've been waiting for. We got to get there before they do," Alex said, rising again and grabbing his rifle that lay beside the mattress. Elias double-checked the chamber of his black pistol and said, "You read my mind." 20 men marched towards the building square that was Section S4. James Morrison stood at the fore of his men. His HUD goggles illuminated the dark areas the naked eye could not see. It displayed his current ammo count of both his rifle and his sidearm, and how many of his men were still alive on the battlefield. He was confident in his men, his equipment, and wore a grin on his face with the anticipation of the slaughter to come. "Lieutenant Morrison, this is Corporal Sampson with the APC group. We've completed our roundup, but this area is desolate. We've taken 5 in total and are beginning our march back to base." "Roger that, Corporal," Morrison answered. James grew a bit uneasy as his team entered a ruined building outside S4 Square. There was no way these Crusaders could evacuate the entire S4 block before he and his soldiers had arrived, nor should the APC group have been able to pick up men without a fight. James switched his radio to just his immediate group as they neared the door, to take them into the S4 block. "Stay alert, men. Something isn't right here. Check the door," James called out. "Locked, sir," one of his men yelled. "Set a charge to breach. They're probably hiding like rats on the other side." "Tyler, are the charges in place?" "Copy that, Elias. Van is set up behind the door with Layla and I. Remy and Alex are around the corners. What have you got on your scope?" Elias looked through the scope of his rifle into the shattered windows. He sighted down soldier after soldier and counted around 20 as he and Alex had predicted. He had 8 rounds to take down as many as he could. That's when he noticed who was heading up the group. James Morrison. Alex, the Morrison kid is with the Marines, Eli said over the comm. Good, take your shots. We'll get him here, Alex replied. Elias drew in a deep breath and lined up his shot with the grunt closest to Morrison. Go to sleep, asshole. There was a loud ringing. Shattered glass fell upon him and his team, and hot blood splashed onto his face. The young Morrison's initial shock from losing a man forced him into the throes of battle as he slammed his back behind cover. Sniper! James yelled, but his men were already in a frenzy. They were discharging their weapons through the windows at random intervals in areas, shattering more glass and giving away their position. The sound of rifle fire rang out again. Another man fell to the ground. When he regained control of the situation, he signaled his men to move to cover by the main door. As they moved closer, they discovered it was welded shut. Get a charge on that door. This place is a goddamn death trap, James screamed. The sniper fired again, another man down. How are they getting the best of me? They're rushing the door. Blow the charges, Elias yelled into his comm as he fired off another round. He peered down at his scope and set it to thermal vision. 6 men were standing or leaning on the wall near the door when the explosion went off. Blood, body parts, and shrapnel flew into the air. But the surprise explosives weren't enough. There was more gunfire now, this time coming from the building. Remy and Alex ran from around the side of the building and opened fire, strafing the exposed Marines and meeting their marks. The ones with enough sense to stay in cover began returning fire. Alex was forced to jump behind an old car for cover. That smoke cleared yet, Eli? Alex said, yelling into his comm. Not quite. My scope's useless now. I'm eyeballing shit up here, man, Elias called back. Do what you can and get ready to pull out of here, Alex ordered as he looked down at the display counter on his gun and took in a deep breath of the dusty cement air. 20 rounds. He stood from behind cover and began opening fire on the soldiers again. Tyler and Layla moved from their hiding spots, found cover, and began taking their own shots at the Marines. As the smoke began clearing, it was apparent that there were few Marines left. Layla ran from cover and began raining submachine gun fire on the nest of Marines. Van followed her, but when his pistol went empty, he stopped to reload out in the open. Man, fall back! They're moving in on you! Tyler yelled, but it was too late. Bullets penetrated his brother's chest from multiple angles. When Van hit the ground, Alex could see his fallen friend's blood begin to soak the pavement. Alex raised his rifle and rolled from behind cover towards the few remaining Marines. They fired wildly in fear, missing their marks. With resolve, Alex peered down his sight at each target and fired. One by one, they fell to his barrage. Screaming overtook his comm as he downed the final Marine. Alex looked over his shoulder to see Tyler kneeling over his dying brother's body, holding it, shouting obscenities, and cursing Morrison's name and his Marines. Tyler, we need to leave. Let it go, Elias yelled over the comm. God damn it, I don't have to let this shit go. He looked up at Alex. Anger and sadness marked his face. Blood and tears ran down his cheeks. He's right, Ty. Grab his body, Alex started to say. Fuck! We've got 3 full APCs coming through, Remy yelled. Elias jumped down from his perch and ran over to the rest of the group. Remy had run around the other side of the alley to scout for more of the Marines. Remy, fall back to us. We need to get out, Elias called over his comm. No, I won't let these things overwhelm us. I've got enough explosives to fuck their day. The sound of an explosion cut her off. Elias looked towards Alex, then down at his pistol. You got an extra clip? Eli asked, moving closer to his friend. Alex pulled one out of his jacket and tossed it to Eli. Take Layla and do what you need to do. We'll get Tyler back to base. You get in any trouble, you get the fuck out, all 3 of you. Elias knew he didn't need to say anything. He nodded, then they took off through the alley. Sir, you've been hit! I'm fine, Private. Just get this fucking APC back to base, James Morrison yelled to his subordinate. But Lieutenant, what about APC 1 and 2? Did you not see the woman with C4 strapped to her chest? Those boys are going to be dead shortly. James shrugged in pain as he felt where the bullets had penetrated him. It would be an easy fix, but he was more worried about the gang that had just gotten the better of him and his squad. He wanted to refuse to believe his father was right, but this group had taken out most of his men and the APCs with ease. James would have to take a verbal beating from his father for this failure, but at least he was alive. In the back of his mind, he hoped this General Latonale would be the answer for this newer, more dangerous threat. Who are they, Lieutenant? A soldier asked. The Crusaders. We're going to be seeing a lot more of them. Elias and Layla hid behind a broken stoop of a long-destroyed apartment as they peered down the road. Looks like 2 of the 3 APCs, but they're already smoking, Elias said, noting the surrounding area. You think he can eyeball well enough to keep me covered? Layla asked. Just be quick. We don't need to get swarmed out here, Eli replied. Layla jumped over the stoop and sprinted from cover to cover towards the stopped APCs. Elias did his best to follow her, but he hated being out in the open. When Layla made it to the vehicles, she began to examine the crash site. Both APCs were blown apart. Bodies strewn about. Remy got both APCs, but there's no sign of her. Then there was a rumbling that shook the ground she stood on, followed by an explosion that threw her from her feet in the APCs. Layla! Elias screamed out. She didn't respond. Another explosion rocked the wall he hid behind. Elias hit the dirt and an alley hard. Before his world went black, he tried to call out her name one more time, but all he got was a cough and the taste of dust and blood on his lips. There were 6 of them? 6 people killed 20 men and destroyed 2 APCs? John Morrison yelled furiously. There are only 4 now, and the bitch who took out the APCs can't do it again, James Morrison replied. He knew his father could see him steaming under his beret, but still he sought to embarrass him. That's still a win for them, James. I'm sure even they know that, despite their losses, John yelled back. James looked down at his boots and acknowledged his father's original stance. You were right. They weren't standard military fodder. The way they fought, I've never seen anything like it. They will come at us again. They're more than a gang. They're a group of combat specialists who knew their terrain very well, John Morrison said. He rubbed his hands down the front of his suit jacket, regaining his composure. We played around in their sandbox and we paid the price for it. However, the thought of a competent group, someone that might pose a challenge, is exciting. I can see why you wanted to face them, James. A new militant group that almost kills your son excites you? Said a voice from behind the pair. Patterson, surely you can see the benefits of this, John said as he looked his secretary up and down. She was wearing a charcoal-collared shirt and slacks today, her slightly curly red hair resting shortly above her shoulders. He found her attire much too formal. Leanna, she said sternly, why don't you explain them to me? She turned towards James and rested her arms around him. Because I'm just happy James made it out with a few scratches. Leanna kissed the son on the cheek. Of that I'm certain, John said with disgust, facing back towards his window. This is perhaps the biggest rebel threat we've had since before Blood Boil. It has drawn a lot of attention in the news in the Six Nations, though they're trying to downplay it. The press has already picked up on the story? How's that possible? It only happened a few hours ago, James asked with anger in his voice. Leaks in our ranks, I'm assuming, Morrison answered. The other nations have decided to slow trade with us and declare travel as dangerous. Still, this group presents us the opportunity to demonize them, turn them into more than just the local pack of thugs. We can brand them as international terrorists, and when we crush them, the other nations will see us as more than an economic power. Once again, our military might will be recognized. I don't think you realize how serious this is, Father. They fought like they were international terrorists, James yelled. Don't overestimate their chances. At the end of the day, they're still vermin from the ruins. They scurry about causing problems, but in the end, they will run themselves ragged, and when they do, we shall stomp them out, John countered. Vermin reproduce, Leanna said. Dismissed, both of you. The general will be arriving soon. Then you'll see the power of true military leadership. Our problem will be just one more headline and one major boon in a week. John made his way back to his desk as his son and Patterson left the room. A smile slid across his face. The strong will his son had, and his ability to survive made him proud, though he'd never tell him that to his face. John Morrison poured a finger of scotch into one of his diamond-cut tumblers and looked forward to the day when groups such as these would be eradicated, and he could begin to do the job of ruling a proper city and preparing for an even greater threat. She must have been hit. Her head felt jumbled and she had burn marks on her arms. The area around her was grimy and the smoke made it hard to breathe. Layla propped herself up and looked at her surroundings. No APC, but the blast had thrown her into an alley. Her comm was dead and her SMG was nowhere to be found. Layla checked her pistol at her side and realized it only had 3 rounds left. "All I need anyways," she said to herself. When the tank blew her away, the Marines must have thought she was gone for good. Blood looked as if it had seeped through her shirt, and the wet parts were coated in dusted asphalt. "I need a shower," she said as she checked the open lacerations. She had been lucky. The cuts were from the fall, and there was no signs of shrapnel. Her thoughts then shifted to Alex as she gave the street a going over before moving towards it. He was going to be pissed when he found out what she had done. Right now, that didn't matter. He wouldn't be angry long, provided she survived. Layla had seen and traveled through most of the New Purgatory ruins, but Section S4 was particularly confusing. Collapsed alleyways, broken signs, and roads cluttered with rusted vehicle husks made it difficult terrain to navigate. Night made it easy to stay concealed, but she was leery about being on what could have been a main road completely exposed. Layla kept a steady pace, but she had no idea where she was going. The road seemed to go on forever as she passed all manner of ruined vehicles. Eventually, she began to hear the hum of what could have been more APCs. Layla dropped a cover behind a pickup truck and leaned her head out. She could see nothing coming towards her nor behind her, but the hum continued. She moved away from the pickup towards the humming, stopping behind the next charred car just ahead of her. When she looked up again, Layla made out vast assortments of neon lights and cleaner buildings. Layla wrapped her SMG around her body and began walking down the road again and examining her surroundings. "Pink, green, blue lights," she said to herself in awe, looking at the reconstructed buildings. The designer must have planned the neon lighting to be built into the outer structure. She, like most of the poor of New Purgatory, had never gotten the chance to see the rebuilt sections of the city. She thought it was beautiful, but also a reminder that she had never lived in a place so vibrant. Beyond the lights, the architecture was a drab black. During the day, buildings must have looked uniformed and ugly. Layla could make out multiple covered catwalks connecting building to building on various levels. It was an adoption of the rich to never have to walk New Purgatory's once cluttered surface. "This must be the entertainment district," Layla said to herself. She turned away from the buildings and kept on down the road. There weren't any people on the streets. She assumed they had probably heard the explosions and decided to stay indoors. Layla kept on down the road with the hope of finding a way back to the outskirts. When Elias woke up, the tanks were gone and he was covered in an inch of the foulest dust since he'd been to Yankee Stadium. "Layla, where are you?" he said softly into his comm. It hurt to talk. There was no reply. He got up and had made his run back to the alley, to where they had been before. There was no doubt in his mind that the tanks were looking for Layla now, thinking him deceased. For a moment he debated trying to follow her deeper into the city, but if the tanks were still out there... No, Alex said get back to base. He spat on the ground and cursed under his breath, and returned to the place of the ambush. There were bodies of fallen soldiers everywhere, but Van's body was gone. He could also find no sign of James Morrison among the dead. Alex had planned to send a message to Morrison, and Eli was going to carry it out. Elias reached into his jacket for the black spray can that hid within. Fitting. The original crime that played in the news that he and his friends hadn't committed would be the calling card for this massacre. Elias used his jacket to cover his mouth and nose and sprayed onto the wall they had destroyed. When he was finished, he let the can fall by his feet and stood back to marvel in the scrawling. Elias wiped his nose, looking back at the blood where Van had fallen one more time before making his long haul back. As he reached into his jacket for a cigarette and stuck it between his lips, he remembered what Alex had told him. That freedom would cost blood. The blood of those who would call themselves the Crusaders.